Welcome, everybody. My name is Robert Boynton. I'm the director of the Literary Reportage concentration here at the Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute at New York University. And I'm very glad you're here for the first event in our series on audio reportage. Audio has become a very important part of the kind of work we do in literary reportage. And we've been very interested in the world of audio reportage, and one of the ways we're trying to engage it is through websites like podforum.org, which is kind of an intelligent search engine recommending podcasts, and by engaging with some of the best podcasters through dialogues such as the one we're going to have tonight. We're going to have another one next month with Robert Rosenthal, and what's it called again? Death and a Sale. Yeah, I get the title of the podcast. Anything with death and sex in it there's so many of those other things. And then we're 1 month after that in April with Alex Kappelman and Alex Brokaw, another student here, and Whitney as well. Yes. So please enjoy the conversation. There's plenty of food and drink. This is going to be held by one of our graduate students, Hannah McCarthy, and she'll be talking with Kaitlin Prest, as you know. So give them a welcome, and thank you very much for coming.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So for those of you that don't know her, I'm just going to give you a little introduction to Kaitlin Prest. She's an auto-documentarian, producer, creative director, and host of Radiotopia's The Heart, a beautifully produced, sex-positive, radical, queer, feminist podcast about intimacy and humanity. She's also a producer on the Life of the Law podcast. Kaitlin has worked as the creative director for Radio Cabaret, an audio documentary variety show presented live at Williamsburg's Union Docks, and numerous other live installations and interactions through The Heart. Before we dig in, I want to play a clip from an episode of The Heart. This particular piece is called First, and anybody that was present at the launch party for The Heart that happened a few Fridays ago will remember it, listening to it in a room full of blushing people in the dark. So anyone in the need of a gentle reminder, this is a short clip from First.
I'm a fan of the soft start kissing, just kissing each other's lips. And then
Try that again.
I'm a fan of the soft start, the kissing, just kissing each other's.
Oh no. Oh wow. So it didn't work.
Lip and
Oh well. That's fine.
It's on the internet.
It's on the internet. I recommend that you all check it out. It's a very sexy, very lovely, intimate story told. So The Heart often asks questions that most radio shows really aren't going to touch. So this particular piece is an interview with a young woman named Drew, and it talks about her first experience, first touch, first kiss, first longing for another person. So how did you develop the idea for this particular episode?
Actually, the idea for this episode dated probably over a year before I actually did the first interview. I was developing a sound design presentation with Brendan Baker, and we were trying to think of a way to illustrate this idea of metaphorical sound. I don't know how, are you guys audio producers? Yes?
I don't think everybody is, so if you want to.
Okay, well anyways, the idea behind metaphorical sound is that you use a sound that doesn't directly correspond to the thing. It's a sound that's totally unrelated, but somehow reveals the quality of the thing that you're talking about. And so the way that we talked about getting at this was this idea of the sound of a kiss, and how the sound of a kiss doesn't really represent the feeling of a kiss. The feeling of a kiss is so amazing, but the sound of a kiss is actually pretty disgusting. And and so it that's how this sort of idea began of like, okay, so if you were trying to sound design a kiss, what would you do? What would you use? And I wasn't really able to come up with anything that was actually very convincing. I was like, oh, firework, like, or, you know, I did this weird puppet show once where I was sort of exploring this idea. I used like a really disgusting squishing sound. I used a bell. I used, I did use a firework. I tried to use people screaming, I don't know, and so, but that didn't really work either. And then I was at a residency this summer, and I decided to revive this like formal experiment, and I just interviewed every single person at the residency about a kiss, any kiss, as a way of sort of, you know, getting at this. I wanted to like practice more. I'd be like, okay, like how can I figure this out? And and so Drew's story was one of the many interviews that I collected, and then I don't know, I just sort of launched into this really long-term kissing obsession, and you know, we did a last kiss episode, and we were like, okay, so we'll do a first kiss episode, and Drew's story was the easiest one to do, so we did it. That's the story.
Is that usually how you and your fellow producers come up with an idea for a show, that you start with this abstract notion and then find a way to work stories into that, or do you find your stories initially and then, or does it go both ways?
It goes, I mean, there's like 1,000 ways to find a story. So one way that we do sort of regularly is we have this like limitless, infinite document called Future Themes. And it started probably like in 2009. And it's still alive. And we just sort of add themes. Like we used to be, when we were Audio Smut, we used to do sort of like the weird format, not weird, the totally conventional format where you have a theme and do a few stories on the theme. So people would just put all of their ideas there. And then we'd have these like big glorious meeting times where we have like margaritas and invite everybody that we think might have ideas for a story, and talk through all the theme ideas and like see, you know, out of all your friends, like maybe one person has a story about, you know, a time that they had sex they didn't want to. Or they know someone who does, or they know this person who wrote a book about that very thing. And so we sort of like, we really draw on community for our stories. And then every once in a while, like there'll be some sort of creative thing, like some weird creative thing, like the kissing, the metaphor kissing thing, that I'm working on by myself, and then makes its way into whatever I'm doing creatively in my life, makes its way into the heart in some form. So that, I'm trying to think if there, oh, right, and sometimes you meet someone at a party who is, you know, tells you something, and you're like, whoa, and you have this, you know, you're like, oh my God, like, can I get your phone number? Like, can I call you? Can we do an interview? It just sort of like works its way into your life.
Yeah, I keep having that experience as a new journalism student. Every conversation is fodder for a story.
That's it.
And
It's
my
kind of
brain
weird.
stops midway through.
It's a bit problematic, but it's like become so embedded in my life at this point that I can't question it, because then I would have to question, you know, my ethics as a person. So, yeah.
And what is it that makes a story right for the heart? I know that you tend to explore the taboo. For example, there is an entire piece, which you should all listen to, about poop and how it factors into sexual experiences.
Yeah.
So yeah, what are the guidelines
That's a
for
good
something
question.
that's correct?
I mean, like the show started out, how do I say this briefly? I mean, it can't just be about love or sex. Like, it has to be telling you something new. It has to, I mean, we're sort of like overtly progressive in our politics when it comes to the way that we think about gender and the way that we think about power. And so all of the stories that we do aspire to expand the listener's understanding of gender or of sexuality or of humanity, essentially. So like they are love stories, and they are trying to access something universal about love and about sex and about bodies, things that we all experience, but they're trying to do that through a lens that is from a perspective that doesn't get heard. And that's like so important to all the stories that we tell. And like, so we throw out a lot of pitches that are just, that are like interesting, and maybe have good tape attached to them, but aren't really furthering the conversation. Like, I think that's like a really big part of how we choose. Also, like, do they go there? Like a lot of the times, like there's like a story, like it can't just be about like, will the person who's telling the story like go to the hardest place and talk about it and like get to like that really vulnerable, really hard thing and say it out loud, Like we had one pitch, we did an STI episode where we were trying to get stories of people who, not like, oh my God, I got an STI, this is horrible, but like, yeah, I got an STI and this is how I fuck. And we got a pitch from someone who was like, so I have herpes, and I recorded the conversation I had with my new boyfriend telling him. And I was like, I love you. Like, can you move to New York and like work with me every day? Her name's Laura Herberg. She's the best. Ultimately, we couldn't do the story because they broke up, and he was like, you are never using that tape, which happens a lot, sadly. But sorry, I know this is going back to that thing of like when it becomes so embedded in your life that you start to think of everything in terms of the story. But I don't know, I reconcile that by saying to myself that like telling these stories does actually like do something positive, I don't, it's not just for the sake of like, it's definitely not for sensationalism, it's definitely not like because I like to get attention or have a popular radio show. Like, it's actually because I think this work is important, and I think that like it's important for people to hear these stories. And I think, I don't know, like when you like get naked in front of everybody else feels okay, like if you're the crazy person like in the room, like other people feel a little bit more free. I don't know.
Yeah, it's sort of normalizing these things that make us uncomfortable.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
actually, I think, those of you that haven't listened to it, that's an experience that I regularly have when I listen to The Heart, that I feel like, oh, other people are like me. And I didn't even know that I was like that, but I am. And it's so nice to hear that it's okay to be the way that you are, But just because people don't talk about it, it makes it difficult.
Yeah.
To even explore those own parts of yourself, I think.
That makes me so happy to hear that, because I think that like that's one of the things that we're really trying to do, and it's one of the things that like I don't know, I mean, I remember like when I talk about like trying to represent the experiences of people who don't, people whose perspectives you don't see, like there is like that's something that's really embedded in our approach. And I think I remember the first time I saw a piece of media where there were people that looked like me. Have you guys seen Short Bus? Anyone? I don't know. Anyway, I mean, it's just like, it's kind of like it's like a somewhat mainstream popular movie, but the people in it like are legitimately queer. Like they're not like queer as folk queer or like L-word queer. They're like fucking queer people. Like they look
Not
like
Hollywood
normal
queer.
people. Sookin Lee's in that movie, so like I don't know. I mean, she's kind of like mainstream, but like in a really weird way. But nevertheless, like I remember seeing people. I don't know. In that movie too, you just see people fucking. Just like you would if you went to a weird party where people are fucking in a room. And it was a really moving experience for me. I was just like, this is awesome. Like I feel validated, and I want other people to have that experience instead of constantly having to like read their lives through the lens of like a middle-class white male gaze, And I know that's kind of like tried to say, like, but it's true, Like people are like, anyway, okay, I'm just gonna stop there. Stop there. Sorry.
Yeah, I think actually what helps to make these stories feel so normal is the way that you present them in terms of your sound design and the way that you conduct interviews, which kind of baffles me. That you say that you find people that are willing to talk about things, but it's still pretty amazing that you get the tape that you do. How do you make someone feel comfortable enough in an interview situation to talk to you more like they're your best friend sharing a glass of wine or your lover than some stranger that's interviewing them?
Right. I mean, there's a few things. I think that just as a person, like, I don't really have boundaries, and like I do have this sort of approach to meeting new people that is very much like, so we've been best friends for life, like we just didn't know yet, you know what I mean? Like I do have that, like, and I feel that, you know, because I remember one time I invited a couple over to talk about the first time she fucked him in the ass, and like by the end of it, I mean, we were like BFFs at the end, but like I don't know, I mean, it was totally normal. I think a big part of it is, especially when talking about like sex, I always go into it thinking, whatever weird thing you got going on, like it could have been me given different circumstances. So like I interviewed a guy who like fucked a dolphin, and not just fucked, but like really fell in love with and like cherished this relationship with, you know, and I say that like sort of flippantly, but like sorry. But you know, he's like definitely like a zoophile, like all the way, you know, like he had this thing with a dolphin, he has a dog now, like that's his thing. And I went into it, you know, I really went into it thinking and feeling for the entire duration of the interview, like, yeah, you know what? I don't know what this guy went through when he was a kid. I don't know how this guy was born. Like, definitely could have been me, different life, you know? And I think that's a big part of it. Another part of it is that when I interview people, I ask them to do it in the bedroom. Like, not actually to, like, get their guard down, but because it's, like, the best place sound-wise most of the time. I'll just say, like, hey, like, let's sit on your bed and do this, regardless of, you know, that helps, too, like, getting into their own intimate space. Also, we mostly interview, like, friends and friends of friends, to be honest.
Okay, yeah, that does help, yeah.
Most of the time, yeah.
And when you're representing these stories through audio, you talked about this a little bit when you were talking about creating the kiss sound or finding something that represents the kiss. Mm-hmm. But you also, for example, in this piece First, which you're all going to listen to when you go home, there are sounds from within the bedroom, sounds of sheets moving and whispering. And so what techniques do you have in recreating that moment, whether it's through music or actually acting it out yourself and getting those sounds?
I love this question. I think originally, it's so funny because me and Brendan are always, like, we do these sound design presentations and we're talking about these things all the time. But so in the beginning, I would get sounds from a sound bank, or from freesound.org is like where I get all of my sounds actually. But I would find, like, I mean, at first I was like, oh, you know, I'm just gonna drop the sound in, but it doesn't, almost never does it work the way I want it to work, almost never. So I started recording my own. But the weird thing is that half the time when you record your own, it also doesn't work. Like 80% of the time, your idea of what you want doesn't really work, and you have to sort of throw it out. Like sometimes when you record your own sound, it doesn't sound like the thing that you think it sounds like. I remember recording the sound of a zipper, and it sounded like, I don't even know what it sounded like. It didn't sound like a zipper. I had this idea in my head of how a zipper sounds. We have these like sort of like sonic like conventions built in because of movies and stuff of how, like, but that's all Foley and like sound design, you know? Like, I mean, the sound of, I don't know, like someone slipping banana peel, like, why do we hear that weird sound? Like, but so with that one, but I've gotten really good at it though at this point. Like, I now know sort of like what sounds are gonna work, what are not gonna work. Like, so when I recorded those sounds, like it was me and Mitra actually, the breathing sounds. Then I got like kind of intense about it. I was like, no, I have to have Drew and Rachel. So I got them to do the breathing sounds, but the sheets, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's all my bedroom. But I try to recreate the scene. Like, so even something as simple as a door opening, like, I want it to be of a certain slowness or of a certain quality that is like really true to the scene or really true to the moment. And oftentimes sound bank stuff doesn't do it. or you have to look for it for a really long time. It's easier to just record yourself.
Yeah, I've done a few of my first audio pieces, and that's the most time-consuming part of it, is trying to fill in the blanks with other sound, other than your interview sound.
Yeah, or even just like, I mean, footsteps, which like are kind of cliche too. Like, I mean, like how are they walking? With what kind of shoes? Like, you want to control those things. So, yeah.
So do you do a lot of takes of these various sounds, and then, or at this point, have you gotten to the point where you're pretty much know?
I mean, I can't do a recording that's shorter than 10 minutes. That's just a fact. So, there you go. I mean, like, that's like 10 minutes of like sheet sounds. You know, like, or I'll do one way where like, okay, so she gets into the bed really quick, and then I do one where like, she gets in kind of slow and is like, trying to figure out where she's gonna be in the bed, and then do a bunch of extra ones. I don't know. Yeah.
How about the music in the pieces? It's really it fits the emotion perfectly, which I think is fantastic.
Thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
I don't always feel that way, but.
So are you recording the music yourself? Or are you finding it elsewhere?
Definitely
is it friends?
Not. No. I mean, like sometimes I'll fuck around with like I'll sample stuff and then mess around with it. Like I'm trying to think of an example. The last time I did that, I mean, I do that a little bit in each piece, I got really into like drones, like making drones myself, like taking a tiny sample of something and then slowing it down and putting a lot of reverb and delay on it and looping it and just like letting it be a wash. Like the Fuck Love episode, for example, is like full of that shit. I was really excited about it at the time, and like so I had this one theme, this one Brian Eno song. But then you're really not allowed to do this. This is so bad that I'm admitting it right now, but like, because it's not my music and I definitely couldn't pay for it. But they can sue me. I have no money. So, so I made like different variations of like a drone out of his, and that was sort of like woven throughout that episode. And like one of them was really, really slow, and another one was like a little bit less slow, and like just different, like sort of made different textures out of that one song. I don't make my own music all the way. Like I just kind of fuck around with other people's music. Again, problematic, but I do ask my friends, like my musician friends, to send me stuff, and they're cool with me messing around with it. So Drew, for example, I mean, so that song, that everybody asked about afterwards. Like, so that was an unreleased song that she sent me when I asked her for music for the episode, and she sent me the stems. So she sent me like all of the different.
It's been stuck in my head for weeks now. I don't know what.
She's gotta send it. She's gotta release that shit. But so she sent me the vocal track, the keys, the other like keys too. And I think that was all there was. But so I was able to like use the keys and the vocal tracks like separately to score the piece, and then have the fully produced song at the end. Yeah.
So you know audio so well at this point, but you didn't start out in audio, right?
No.
Can you give us a little bit of a background how you got to this point, where you started?
Yeah. So. Okay, so once upon a time, I went to theater school. And no, before that. Okay, once upon a time, my dad was a music teacher, and I was kind of forced into music from age like 4 until age 16. And I had a really bad piano teacher who was really obsessed with technique, and it was not artful, and it was like painful and sad and all about discipline, and it wasn't fun. And I hated my dad when I was a teenager because I was a rebel, and we didn't get along. So I didn't want to be in band, but he forced me to be in band. And then I was like, fuck this, I'm going to be an actress, and I went to theater school. And then I ultimately didn't really like theater. And then I was like, I'm going to be an activist and save the motherfucking world. And then I went to university. And I was having trouble because like I started getting into social work, and I was like, this is horrible. I hate this because I have no boundaries. Like I just couldn't handle it. And frontlines activism was like not my thing. Policy things, like paper things, I can't do that. So after a while, I was like, okay, I have to reconcile this sort of like activism and like artistic tendencies. I was still doing theater at that point and music. But I met a guy at a party, and he was like, you should help me with my radio show. And I was like, that sounds awesome. And I just started listening to the CBC. I'm from Canada. because my roommate's dad worked at the CBC and she would listen to it all the time. And I had a boyfriend who was a news junkie, and I wanted to like kind of one-up him on his like news knowledge, but I really didn't want to read the newspaper. And then I met this guy. I was like into radio at the time, but I had never listened to radio as a kid, ever. And I was like, it's like this weird new thing that I don't know anything about, kind of, you know? And so I showed up, that guy, it was like Friday night, and then on Monday morning at 9 a.m., I showed up at CKUT in Montreal to his dumb radio show. And, sorry, I shouldn't say that. But it was dumb. It was so dumb. It was like about McGill, which is like, that radio station, CKUT, is a university station, but it's not connected to the university at all. Like every year they have to beg the university to renew the funding because none of the students even know it exists. It's like totally like punk rock, like radical station. Anyway, that's how it all began. And then I just got like totally obsessed with it. Like CKUT is the kind of place, they don't teach you anything. They just give you the equipment, like they barely teach you how to use it, and they're like, oh, like, you know, we need a host for this show called Audio Smut, like the hosts are quitting, like anyone want to do it? And I was like, yep. And they're like, great, you're doing it, like here's the board.
So you actually just totally fell into it.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, but that space was so important, like that, having that space, and like, I don't know. I mean, one day I'll start donating to CKUT on a yearly basis. But yeah, like that's how it happened. And I got obsessed with it immediately, and I sort of like dropped everything else. And we were doing monthly at that time, and that was 2008. And I've made a radio piece for Audio Smut, Now the Heart, every month since then. Yeah.
And so you work exclusively in radio now. That's your life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I knew pretty quickly that that's what I wanted. I was like, well, I didn't even say I wanted it. It just started to happen. Like I was like, I don't want to do anything else. Like, and everything that was taking me away from it, I would start to resent. And so when I moved to New York for like a relationship, and then I realized it was radio heaven here, and I was like, I'd never want to leave. And yeah, slowly but surely, I sort of made a commitment to never work in a restaurant again. And I tried to hold to that, and you know, slowly but surely, like radio. It's pretty easy, like to get if you want to.
Oh yeah, I want to. Yeah.
You can. You definitely can.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. And just for those of us that don't know, the Heart used to be Audio Smut.
That's true.
That's true. And so you are now with Radiotopia, you are the Heart.
Yes.
How did you transition from being the Canadian Audio Smut to the New York Radiotopia, the Heart? I'm sure that's a long story, but...
It is a long story. I'll try to do a short one. Okay, let me think. Like there's a million ways to tell the story. Like what's the best one? Well, I went to this thing called PRPD. I do really want to gauge how many of you are radio producers. Are you audio people? Okay, yeah, okay, just checking. So there's the PRPD, you guys probably know it. It's like program director land, and it was like a really disillusioning moment because it was like, I thought that I was like, I have a show and they have like radio stations. So like, this is great. But like, it wasn't great, it was horrible. And like, it's very like business admin side of public radio. And actually, you know what, it's funny. Nick Vanderkolk was the first person to tell me that I needed to change the name, which is a weird thing, like, because you would think he would be more supportive of the name Audio Smut, but, and I was like, yeah, fuck you. And then I went to PRPD, and like 27 more people told me I should change the name. And I was like, maybe. And then it became like a year-long indecisiveness attack of should we change the name? Like, are we gonna be, like, because I guess Audio Smut, like, we wanted it to be a real radio show. And at the time I was like, why wouldn't it be? You know, we have like, you know, this content, and like radio stations have to fill 24 hours every single day. It made no sense to me. I was just like, this should be just as easy as being like, hi guys, I have this thing, like, don't you want to put it on the radio? And they were like, no, definitely not.
Wasn't it? It was popular in Canada, though, wasn't it?
Popular, I don't know, like, it was popular in Montreal.
Okay.
You know, but popular is also kind of like a stretch. I think it was known in a small way in a certain community of people. It did get like voted the second best local radio show, but I think that the reason, like, those things are always rigged, you know? Like, we had this girl on the team who was like, you know, she was like I think they wrote articles about her. She was like the queer queen of the Mile End or some shit. And so like when we were up for that, like she had a huge network, and so everyone voted. It was like a one moment, you know, like, but it wasn't really real. Nobody really knew like about the show. But so no, I would say no, it was not popular. And so, but it was okay. It was on the radio. Once we moved to the States, like everybody said, they were like, what? Like, you're gonna try to get, don't even go near the content itself. Like, something with the word smut in the title, like, definitely not. This is never gonna happen for you. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I didn't believe them. But over time, like, it did become, like, I mean, the thing is, there was a lot of things that needed to change about the show. It wasn't just the name. It was like, we didn't know how to make radio. We were like, you know, learning based off of, like, literally just through experience, through trial and error. And so it was really rough, you know, like, it was really roughly, you can hear it. I mean, go to season 1, listen to some stuff, you'll hear it. So there was that. It wasn't professional sounding. And then, yeah, the content, like the politics, like, you know, like even just something as simple as like one of the pieces we did just uses the pronoun they without explaining it. You know, like that kind of thing. Like people react to that.
Journalism rules that you're not supposed to break.
Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of that stuff. It got to a point where I started to feel like, okay, this is probably never going to happen. This is going to be like my passion project until I can't do it anymore. And so, but yet the question of changing the name was still on the table of like, okay, so should we just stick to what we're doing, and be radical and like say fuck you to everyone and fuck you to public radio and fuck everything, and we're just gonna do this? Or like, are we gonna try to like make ourselves more marketable, you know, and change the name to something that's public radio palatable? And that was a hard question. Like, we went back and forth for over a year because the question was half like, okay, so we could change our name and they're still gonna hate it, you know, like we're still never gonna get picked up by anything, you know, like that will be horrible, like, because we'll alienate the people who are down and still be too weird for people who are not, you know. But I mean, magical things happen. So, I mean, I think that our sound got more consistent. We got, I don't know, we just started to get a lot of attention. We did a snap judgment story. Like, there just a lot of momentum started to build around the show. And at the right moment, I set up a meeting to ask for advice from Jake Shapiro, who is Radiotopia. And plus all my friends are on Radiotopia. I felt so left out whenever they didn't invite us to be part of it. I was more than left out. I was like depressed. But yeah. And then so we were like, I said to him, I used it as a sort of an opportunity. I was sort of like, okay, well, our audience has grown. Like, you know, we have we're at like 20,000 right now, and you know, just need some advice from someone who knows. Like, should we change the name? Would it make a difference? And I used that as a springboard to talk about how we were rebranding the show and like say all the things that were really good about the show. And like, he bought it, he was into it, and he set up a meeting with the rest of the people, and I pitched them so hard. And then they called me back and said, yeah. I mean, there were probably a lot of other factors involved. Like, I think there were a lot of people rooting for it. But, like, yeah. But, yeah, that's the story.
Yeah. I mean, even still, the content is it's definitely not public radio friendly, right? So you call it a radical show. I mean, there are podcasts out there that are literally pornographic, but they're also not so much in the mainstream. And you speak very frankly and transparently about sex and love and that whole world, but you've convinced people that it ought to be heard. I mean, what was your pitch when you were pitching the show?
That's a really good question, because the thing is, at the beginning I was like, this is so important, this is like, the world needs this, like this is something that isn't being done. Nobody gives a fuck about any of that shit, and that was another really depressing factor about PRPD, is like, the only thing people care about is audience. You have to learn how to speak their language. Like, so to be honest, like, like when I pitched Radiotopia, like I wasn't talking about like, representing sex like with authenticity. I wasn't talking about like representing marginalized communities. I was saying this is gonna be like, Joe Frank, but like a woman. Like that's what I said. And I kind of meant it. I did kind of mean it. But like I had to, over the years, like I did learn that like, I did learn that you have to speak their language, and even in like the tone of the show, like figuring out a way of like straddling, public radio vocabulary and vocabulary that's relevant to the communities that we're trying to speak to. And I think that's been the goal of the show from the beginning, is like figuring out a way of both being, relevant to specific communities, but also being accessible to a wider public. Yeah, that's the answer, I think.
Do you think you've had to make the show less smutty?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%. Like I ask myself sometimes, I think that I think it's a natural sort of evolution for me. I think secretly I've always just wanted to make a show about love, but I thought that was too lame. I think that ever since I was probably a teenager, that's what I wanted to do. I think that when I started doing a show about sex, it felt more legitimate in a way, because open, honest, intelligent conversations about sex weren't really being had. And it's like edgier, you know what I mean? It's like easy to say, I have a show about sex, than it is to say, I have a show about love. Like that's embarrassing a little bit, but in a way, it's like, that's why it's important too, because we're like, ugh, and it's like, why are you like that? Everybody fucking wants it, so, sorry, I keep swearing. But yeah, so I think that in a way, I did feel pressure from like, public radio to make it less smutty, but I also just naturally have come to be more interested in questions about relationships and love and like how we are, and less, like I think when I was younger, I liked the feeling of shocking people in a way. I did enjoy the idea of putting like basically erotica on the radio at 6 p.m. That was exciting to me. Yeah. And so now I'm interested in a more nuanced look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can say, I've listened to earlier versions of the show, and there is something shocking and exciting about the earlier episodes, but at the same time, the accessibility of the show as it is now, I think allows it to better speak to me, at least.
I think to everyone. I think that like that's a big part of. I think that something changed even in season 2. Like, the Fuck Love episode was more. It was the first time we did something more about love, and when we did we did a performance around it. Like we did a Q&A, and one of the first questions was like, "Well, this is pretty tame compared to And I blamed it on public radio then, but it is. I don't know. I think. Yeah, I'm just sort of becoming a little bit more mature in my approach, maybe. And also, yeah, I think that's a big reason why the show's become more popular, because people can stand behind it in a way that they weren't able to before. It's like not super embarrassing to like share something that's about falling in love with someone and not knowing what the hell's going on than it is to share something, about a girl masturbating in a public bathroom. Like, it's embarrassing to do that. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, what does that mean? I don't know how I feel about what that means, because there is something about the mission of trying to, like, normalize open conversations about sex that are sexy. They're not just like, let's talk, like, biologically or analytically or, like, psychologically about sex, but, like,
You don't access it the same way when you have to talk about it in scientific terms.
That's it, yeah. I mean, I think that there is something really, I think that I still believe that it's important for there to be sexual content out there that's not porn, but that's not, like, boring. I think that's important. Like, I think feminist porn is really important. I think that something like Make Love Not Porn is really important. I think, but I guess I'm just not as interested in that right now.
So where do you see the heart going in the future? What would you can answer that first.
Yeah, I mean, my dream has always been, my dream in the last, like, year and a half has been to, like, be kind of like an an art house, and not just a radio show, but like an art house that, like, makes, like, audio-based work, but that, like, maybe makes, like, 6, like, just deeply moving, immersive audio experiences that, like, or maybe, like, 6, like, for listening like that, or, like, listening in a room, and then, like, experiences, like installations. Like, over the summer I did this installation in a bathtub that was, like, it was, like, interactive. Like, I want that kind of thing. Like, I kind of want to go more in the direction of using audio as a way of, like, making people feel things, but across different, like, different types of experiences. And I guess that's, like, the theater person sort of coming out. And theater, like, my theater background has always sort of informed, I've always been interested in doing sort of radio performance mixtures. But I feel like there's something tyrannical about, like, the constant output, like, needs of radio. And I think that we're at a moment right now where radio is reimagining what it can be. And I'm really excited to move in the direction of, we don't have to release bi-weekly, we don't have to release weekly. Like, people are appreciating radio as an art form in a way that allows for someone to make 3 incredible works per year and actually, like, survive. That's my dream. That's my dream.
Do you think that's possible? Do you think that the economy around it is changing enough?
I can't think about those questions.
No,
I just have to go for it. Like, and that's kind of why I'm here now. Like, at this moment with something that was once called Audio Smut that is now called The Heart. That was really rough and is now, like, sort of okay and good and, like, nice to listen to. Like, I mostly just sort of try to focus on the idea, and, like, the practicalities will work themselves out, hopefully. Yeah. So just check in with me in 10 years.
I will do
see.
that.
Maybe, I also have a secret fantasy of, like, quitting radio and becoming a puppeteer, but we'll see. We'll see if that happens.
Just one last question, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for questions to see if they want to ask you anything. But what is it in particular about audio that drew you in over theater, over music? I mean, well, music is audio, but the interview and the crafting experience, what is it about that medium that works for you so well?
That's a good question. For me, strangely, even though I just said, like, I really want radio to be, like, worshipped with the same level of excitement and cred as all the other art media, like, that the fact that radio isn't is the reason why I was so excited by it. Like, when I found radio, I felt like it was in a secret, like, like, sandbox, like, that nobody could see. Like, I could do anything. Everything felt new. Every single thing I did felt like I was, like, pushing the medium in some way. Whereas, like, with theater, like, with all the other, like, institutionalized art forms, I just felt, like, completely, paralyzed under the weight of my own knowledge that what I was making sucked. Like, with music specifically. Like, with music, like, I felt so paralyzed knowing that it would take, what would it take for me to make a dent in this? Yeah. And then with film, I mean, I've had like a little tiny 2-second fantasy of going into film, but then I was like, oh my God, like the money and like the power that is required to do that. And then with theater, I mean, like all of these things like they're so deeply ingrained and so, you know, radio just felt so free, you know, and it felt like ripe for pushing. And like that was really inspiring and like encouraging and exciting. And I still feel that way, you know? Yeah.
I totally agree with you, especially coming from theater, which I studied for many, many years. There's something so exciting about radio as something that hasn't been totally tapped out yet. And you can try anything with it right now, which is really exciting. Yeah, it feels like I maybe won't fail.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
Whereas
I mean,
theater
like,
felt like I absolutely will.
Yeah, I mean, like with radio, I mean, like you can get excited about radio and meet like your heroes within a year. You know, like you just have to go to like 2 festivals, and you're like, oh my God, like I saw whoever. Like, I don't know who your heroes are, but who's my hero? Jonathan Goldstein wasn't my hero when I met him at a festival, but he became my hero after seeing him at that festival. But like, I mean, it's so small, and people are so, like when you meet other people who are like kind of famous in radio, like they want to help you. They're like, you like radio too? Like, great. Like, yes, let's have coffee. Like, I'll tell you everything. Yeah. They get excited. Like radio's a really welcoming place. Yeah, that's it.
Great.
Yeah.
We can try it. Yeah. Would you guys like to listen to the clips? Okay. We'll give it a shot. No promises. Okay.
The soft part, the kissing, just kissing each other's lips, and then integrating the tongue, letting the kisses last longer, including the neck and the ear, and maybe even the temple or the forehead or something, and digging your hands in the hair, stroking that space between the neck, stroking the collar, or the shoulder blade, or the sternum.
It was 3 years since I'd seen Kyle, and he was napping in my bed. He'd been visiting for days. We hadn't kissed yet.
Well, they're beautiful. Go right to the heartradio.com. .org. After you leave here and listen to all of them, you'll get very turned on. So does anyone have any questions for Kaitlin?
Yeah, we just talked about your secret puppeteering fantasy. Why does it take you so much?
I want to, like, okay, I'll just tell you about one. I want to make, like, okay. Before I found radio, Bread and Puppet, have you ever heard of Bread and Puppet Theater? I have this, like, these theater friends in Montreal who basically, like, went to Bread and Puppet Theater and were, like, totally indoctrinated and came back and made all this fucking awesome shit. Like, we did this play, there's this thing called Pop Montreal. It's like a music festival, and they did this this program where they would like get artists and musicians to work together. And so we did this puppet show, which was like puppets made of cardboard and paper mache and stuff. But it was scored by these by these musician friends that I had, and it was like amazing. You know, like puppets and music work really well together, and so that was a really like formative experience for me, and I was like, I want to do this always. And then I went to Bread and Puppet, and it was amazing, and I want to do like a documentary, an audio documentary that is illustrated with small like hand-drawn puppets. So anyway, I'll do that one day, probably, maybe in 10 years.
You may not be able to answer this, but have you reached people with your show who you never expected you would reach?
That's a good question. You know what? I'm gonna tell you that, like, yes, and like, I guess straight white dudes. I was not expecting. I don't know why. I just wasn't expecting, like, even at PRPD, like a young, like 23 or 4-year-old, like, dude, like, he was just like, I'm so moved by your, and I was just like, that's so weird. I mean, I guess it's kind of, it makes a little bit of sense because it's like sexy, but like, I guess it's just, I mean that particular perspective. I mean, you won't hear like a straight white dude. There's no straight white dude in the history of audio smut, except for Kyle, which he doesn't really count because told through my perspective. But he's queer though, actually. Like, so that does, I mean, but whatever. I mean, I shouldn't really put that's not nice. But I mean, people have asked me like, so when are you gonna have like a dude on the show, like ever? And I'm like, maybe one day, like. And it's not like anyway, it was surprising to me that even though like the perspective is very like women and very like queer and like people of color and like trans and all the other things, like it's been interesting to see how much like sort of like that it's still reaching people that it's not talking specifically to. That's it, yeah.
I wonder, actually, have you ever had anyone reach out to you after listening to a show and say that it changed something for them?
Yeah, like a lot. Like, and it's so fun. It's just like so nice. I'm trying to think of the best one. No, it's a secret. I can't tell. But yes, the answer is yes.
What does the future look like in terms of freelancers pitching to the Heart or collaborating with?
That's a good question. Usually, if someone, I mean, like, so, okay, I ignore almost all incoming pitches. Sorry. I mean, it's like the long email with lots of text, and like I'm having a real hard time like emailing people back in my life right now. And so, yeah, the long part, but every once in a while, one just will like cut through. Like this guy, it was a dude, surprise, but it was like this. He wrote, the pitch was so well written, I just couldn't stop reading. And it was about a friend of his who was brought up like rigidly Catholic, who was like 24 and was thinking about masturbating for the first time. But he wasn't sure if he was gonna do it, you know? And I was like, oh my God. And he's like, I'm gonna try to get this guy to record. I was like, yes, for sure. Or like, so a perspective that you can't get anywhere. Like, so for example, the woman who pitched the story about, I just, you know, recorded myself. If you have tape of like a real intimate moment, like, so for example, something I've been thinking about recently is like, how come I've never heard what a real breakup sounds like, for example. You know, like what do people actually say to each other? Like, I would love to know what people actually say, you know? If you have tape like that, if you are ballsy enough to get tape like that, like I will always find that in a pitch, like, and be like, oh my God, yes, you know, like, because I think documenting real intimacy, like actually documenting it, like that's just a terrain that we do not document, and it's kind of weird and like ethically challenging, hard. I mean, it's embarrassing to be like, oh, this is like one of the most important and intimate moments of my life right now. Can I just like record this, you know? But I feel like it's important for people to hear. Anyway, so that's the main way. And then like mostly we collaborate like pretty selectively with people whose work we really like already. That's kind of how it is. But we are developing an internship program right now for the summer. For people who are part of communities that we're like claiming to represent. So like, yeah, like, I don't know. We're gonna release information about that. But like I mean, I guess the goal with the internship program is to try to like empower people to tell their stories who don't have access, you know, generally. Like, I don't know. I mean, there's a reason why there's no diversity in public radio. So I'm trying to figure that out. Anyway, yeah.
You also work on Life with a lot.
I do, yeah.
So I'm wondering how the creative challenges that you talked about compare or maybe complement each other in those two shows.
Right. Which creative challenges exactly?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm wondering how you approach trying to tell something like law that both things nobody wants to talk about it.
Right. Yeah.
How why you're working for those two? How you ended up in those two?
I know, so weird. I mean, again, randomly, I was broke, so broke, trying to do my I'm never gonna work in a restaurant again thing, and Nick Vanderkolk, who I had met at a festival randomly, who had known about audio smut, very basically, just sent me this email being like, hey, are you interested in this? And it was like a call for an editor for this law show. And I was like, I need money. And I want a radio job. So I said yes. And then they interviewed me and I was like, I've never worked for a real radio show, ever. But I make this show called Audio Smut, and I've been doing it for a long time, and I'm directing it basically. So I have that kind of skill, to be a creative director. And I was like, this is never gonna. And shockingly, Nancy Mullane, she's a magical woman, and I don't know, she listened to Audio Smut, and she was like, I want this. So early Audio Smut. Anyways, it's funny because now I'm dealing with her open heart, as someone who works with her every day. It's just no, this is not, please, let's not hire that person, no. Anyways, but I got the benefit of her open heart in that moment. So I just said yes to the law show, and I think that what's kept me with Life of the Law is that I came in when it was just starting, so its aesthetic, its whole, the whole structure of the show wasn't created yet, and I was on the ground floor of making the decisions that created the aesthetic and the approach of the show, and that creatively was really exciting for me. So even though the content was not my style and not really my line of interest, I got to sort of even just create a position for myself as a sound designer, which is not something that a lot of radio shows have. That's kind of what I do there, and the challenges creatively. It is an interesting exercise in sound design to ask myself, how can I help tell this really convoluted legal story with sound and music? The thing is that if the story is bad, most of the time there's nothing to be done. So that's what I've learned about that. If the story is good, it's easy to use sound and music to help it, or to, but it's a totally different thing. Yeah. Does that answer it? Okay.
Anyone else before we wrap up? You guys back there?
This might sound kind of weird, but I feel having sex with a dolphin isn't that weird.
Me either. But after the interview, I felt like it wasn't.
And so I'm just curious, have you run into more taboo questions than that, or had to deal with more fucked up issues than that? How did you?
Right. Well, so we're working on a story right now about an age play situation with a grown trans woman who pretends to be 6 years old and lives with mommy and daddy, so there was a moment where the question of so is it hot to you because she's pretending to be a child? Is that why it's hot to you, or is it something else? That question came up. I think that's really the only zone. Consent, yeah, like consent and like that's like pedophilia. That is something that we haven't really touched yet. Yeah, and so that one that one moment, like we're not really afraid to go to ask people questions, but like we kind of like are constantly, it's about power in the end for us. Like, so if there's like a questionable power dynamic, that's where we'll start to pass some judgments. But most of the time, like we won't pass the judgments on tape or like put the tape out there. We'll just sort of walk away and look for something else. Because I think our approach is very much like about being positive and like sort of celebratory rather than getting into like, I don't know, I just don't really want to give airtime to people who I think are bad, you know? Anyway, yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay.
One more question over here, did we?
Yeah, I'm actually wondering about when you mentioned that you're surprised to hear that sort of straight white men listen to the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of leads me to a question, which is, when you make a heart, who are you making it for? What do you anticipate the audience looks like? And really, who are you trying to reach?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the truth is, like lately in the last 3 years, like we have really been, so maybe that's dumb that I'm surprised, because I think we've been trying to make it, we've been trying to strip away the radical feminist language and talk in terms that are like accessible to people who are in power in radio, basically. I mean, because that's the facts. Like, and it's true that we wanted to be accessible, but I think for the last 3 years we've really been trying to get the attention of people who would support the show and help us keep doing the work that we're doing. Now that we have support, we're sort of reorienting our focus and trying to reconnect with being relevant to like the queer community, basically, like queer and feminist. Like I want people who are like queer and feminist to like listen to the show and feel like it's not fluffy, you know? And like and again, like now that like an institution with some power has said yes to us, I feel a little bit more free to push the boundaries than I did before when we were like homeless and broke. Yeah, and the cool thing is that like in the Radiotopia contract it says that they have no editorial, they can't put any, they can't, it's there, it's in the contract. So I mean we still have to make them happy, and they're very like serious about that type of creative control, which is really awesome. And actually like after actually being invited to be a part of Radiotopia, it feels like they are actually like interested and serious about like getting voices that are not just their own, you know, which is part of the reason why they probably even said yes to us in the first place, which is really inspiring and makes me happy to be a part of it. Yeah.
Have you had anybody reach out to you from those communities that you are trying to represent and have a negative response or feel misrepresented or exposed in a way that they're...
Not really, no. I mean, because the thing is that our team is, you know, like we had, like our team for the, like, you know, like I'm like the least queer person on the team. And I'm less queer now than I was before. Like, I don't know what's happening to me. Like, but I mean, I still like identify as queer. Like, I just haven't had sex with a woman in a really long time. So I'm starting to wonder. But yeah, like, I mean, our team, like there's like a sex worker, like hardcore, like, you know, people who are like in the community, like, you know, she's like sex worker, she is like super queer, like we had like a trans dude, like, you know, like we're really like particular about that, and like it seems weird to be like, well, I mean, even the last two people who came onto the team were kind of like straight, like, I don't know, it's just it seems weird to, like, affirmative action is like a question, right? Like, but you know, like, there's just, yeah, I don't know. I feel guilty about it sometimes, but the team is, yeah, like we definitely, like white straight people are in the minority on our team. So, I mean, so to answer your question, most of the time the problems that we've had have been on an individual basis, and like not coming, like someone wouldn't be like, oh, I really think that you you represented trans people badly. Like, it would more be like, hey, I listened to the final cut of the story and I hate it. You know, like, can you change it, please? Or can you take it down? Like, that's happened a couple times, twice. But, so, individual, yeah, that's the answer to that question.
In the back.
I listened to the radio play that the Heart made, and I really liked that. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process from, it said on the website that you spoke to, I think it was like 17, a number of people about the experience of falling in love. And then from all that, all those interviews created this narrative. Can you speak a little bit about taking it from sort of the real world into that, and how did you make that piece?
Yeah, so the interview transition into the script situation. There was a first draft of the script that was actually built out of an interview, and then we had to, like, sort of, it wasn't really hitting in the way that we wanted it to hit, and so we had this amazing woman named Shara Bannerman, like, transcribe, like, literally, like, 17 interviews, like, transcribe all of them, and then we went through all of the interviews and sort of, like, picked out the most interesting, like, there were, like, so many sessions, like, there was, like, a session with, like, you know, the good part, like, we decided what the narrative was gonna be, like, meet person, like, fun meeting, think you're in love, you know, have a, like, nice little week, and then start questioning what's going on, and then and then it ends, and you realize you have this moment of disillusionment. And so we edited all of the interviews into selects, fitting this narrative arc. So we had, like, you know, this huge session with, like, you know, 12 tracks, like, of these interviews, and then listening to all of them, and then, like, slowly, painstakingly writing a script that was based on the most interesting elements out of all of them, and also, like, the through lines out of all of them. But the final product ended up being kind of a combination of, like, my experience and then these two interviews that were kind of the best. That's sort of how it happened. But it took over a year. It was, like, fucking painstaking. It was so long and painful. The writers, I don't know how they do it. Like, that was the first time that we ever did something that, like, was written instead of, like, cut out of audio. Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah, Jen.
I have a question for you that will also answer me. So, we like compelling stories, but, like, sometimes these compelling stories touch on very taboo subjects.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, I mean, like, I have been afraid to approach people with compelling stories because I don't know what they're going to get out of me interviewing them.
That's a good question.
But I want people to hear that story. So, I mean, I vacillated between, like, actually going through with it and then just, like, crossing my fingers and hoping that they don't feel like they were exploited afterwards.
Right.
And to, like, just not even approaching the subject. So, I guess, like, how do you
Navigate that? Jen works on our show. She does all of our design and also sometimes makes radio things. I would say, I mean, like, that's where the mission comes in for me. Like, to me, like this project has always been has always had a mission, and the mission is to like in the older days, destigmatize open, honest, real conversations of about sex. And now it's more like, rewriting the stories that we tell ourselves about love, and like by telling the truth about love, like it allows other people to like tell new stories about what's going on in their lives. I don't know about you guys, but like I find anytime I'm having like a hard time with love stuff, like I have all these like fucking narratives in my head of like how I'm making sense of my experience that come from dumb ass movies. I'm like, why am I thinking this right now? Like, why am I like framing it in this way? And like, why can't I talk about this in any other way? And like I feel like if there are more stories out there that are more complicated, it actually helps people love better and like be in their bodies better. And like that's how I feel like when we interview people and when I'm pushing people to like get there like and tell the true thing, it's like this is gonna make someone feel so good to hear this, like with Laura, like when we were talking about like us having a horrible threesome and it being really bad, and like she was like, I want that off, like I don't want that out in the world. And I was like, do you know that like 3 people have already emailed that's been out for 1 day, like saying, I know how that feels to like be in a situation where you think you're supposed to be having a sexy time, but it sucks, and I really, I feel happy to have heard that. I feel, as you said, like, I feel like there's other people like me, and like there's, in this particular category, there's like there's so little content out there that's so telling the truth that like it's hard, like, and it's like the most like important thing in most people's lives. Like we think about it every day and we build our whole lives around it. Anyway, you know what I mean? Like I feel like it's just like if you tell the truth, then other people will feel good. Like it's not just like, oh, this is so interesting. It is, but yeah, that's it.
Caitlin, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining
Thank
us
you guys
tonight.
This was great. It's so long.
Thanks for answering all of our questions.
Cool. I'm glad. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, guys. Yay.